bonsoir, bonsoir. Kayla. So happy that you are all here today. And I'm gonna give just about one more minute. Usually around this time I get an email from somebody very anxiously that can't get in. And I understand that. I would want to get in too. We're gonna have a good time today. So I want to make sure that none of those emails come in. Again, I'm super appreciative for you coming. I'm actually going to turn this light off. It's bugging me a little bit. Oh, 1 second. I'm back. All right. I don't see any emails, so that's really good. So what that means is I'm going to flip my phone and begin. So excited to have so many of you here. For my friend in Australia, holy heck, is it really super early for you? I don't know what time it is there, but I know that number one, I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to live in Australia, and because everybody thinks I'm Australian. And number two, I can never get timing right. 2 a.m. Sani, I hope I'm saying your name right. Sani, thank you so much for being here. All right. We are going to start. And I'm going to share my screen. Once I share my screen, I won't be able to come back to the chat. Typically, we have Kate with us here today, but we don't. So we'll go over what to expect, though I just want to let you know that I will not be able to see the chat. I'm Sunny. I'm super glad that I'm saying your name right. And I'm a night owl too. So cool. All right, let's start. Dun, 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 dun. If I can share the screen, there it is. And we're off. We're gonna do the slideshow. I have to let you all know a couple of things. Obviously, I've already said, hooray, hooray, you're here. The other thing is that this week, as many of, well, you all know, it's the last week of April, and that is the busy season for the TISM appreciation, awareness, wherever people are in their journey of, believing that the autistic people are here. We are here, and I've had every thing to do every day this week, and I was able yesterday to go. So I'm in the United States in Connecticut, and I was able to go to my state's capital and do a presentation I'm happy to report I was the only white woman there. It was Colors of the Spectrum, and it was about boosting BIPOC representation. I've had so much, so I'm super dysregulated today, but here's why that's a good thing. This is my joy. This is everything. And so what you're going to get is super autistic, authentic Sarah, and I'm just super thrilled to share my passion with you. Again, there's my name, Sarah Salvaggi Hernandez. Kate Jones is typically here. Kate Jones is my amazing partner in so many things, including OpConnect, which is our business that we have together. Kate, you will, if you don't know Kate, you will know Kate. Thank you. Kate has done all of the illustrations in this presentation. Kate's an illustrator. Kate is autistic. Kate is a psychotherapist. Kate is awesome. I could talk about Kate all day, but I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. So my name is, again, Sarah Salvaggi. Got to get that Italian in there. Sarah Salvaggi Hernandez. Roles that are really important to me include mother, partner, daughter, friend, educator, and author. The identities that I tend to advocate around include queer, autistic, and deaf. That is something that a lot of people don't know about me. I have bilateral cochlear implants. My mission in life is really simple: to provide sensory. I believe that sensory is the way. I believe that sensory might solve world peace. So I just simply want to provide sensory, and while doing so, keep my vision centered on the creation of identity affirming context to support neurodivergent equity and access to neurodivergent development. So that's me. What other things are fun about me? I'm an OT on social media. I play the autistic OT. I'm super happy to let you know that I am not the only autistic OT. And not surprisingly, the autistic OTs are a very diverse group. And we are claiming our profession right now, which is pretty awesome to be a part of. What else do I do? So much. Sensory. Let's go. The agreements that we have. Oh, my favorite thing to mention. Sorry, let me go back. I was the first openly autistic person elected to government in the United States. That's fun. Yay me. That was like 5 years ago though. So I'm getting out of the way for the newcomers. Some agreements while we're here, it's important to have conversations about these. That number one, you will hear me using identity first language. I completely accept people who identify however they like to identify. That is your identity, and I'm not in the business of telling anybody else who they should be. But when this is essentially kind of like my living room, the space that I'm creating and holding here. So know that you will hear identity first, meaning I am autistic, I am neurodivergent. Those things will be used here as baseline. So that some of you, that's completely comfortable to. Some of you are coming in from the occupational therapy community and have a more medical model, and that's not. I give you a hug, give yourself a hug. It's okay, we're using autistic. Because we have created and are protecting a neurodiversity affirming space. And we know that one of the most important things about claiming your identity is being able to identify yourself. The other thing that you will not hear throughout any of this conversation or any of my conversations as an individual or as an OT is we do not use functioning labels. Instead, if somebody has support needs, we can talk about their support needs if it's appropriate to do so. However, the term high functioning is used to deny neurodivergent people supports and services, while the use of the term low functioning is used to deny neurodivergent people autonomy and agency. And those terms, high and low functioning, just are not helpful. While I say these things to you, again, if you are from the education community or the medical community or government community, this is going to make you uncomfortable. I invite you to sit with that. It's okay. The change model, which I talk about all the time, tells us that the first two parts of change are anger and denial. So if any of those things make you angry or you deny, like you don't think that it's right, that's okay. We're on the way to change. It's just the first step. That being said, if something becomes super uncomfortable to you, please have a plan for yourself. I have made a plan for myself. I have water here to drink. If I really needed to, I absolutely would take a step away. And I invite you to do the same. If anything is coming up for you in your body, if you need to get up, if you need to move, if you need to nourish yourself with a drink, a snack, please do so. This is a webinar, so the controls are protected a little bit. So your camera's not going to pop on. You can't even turn your camera on. So don't worry about it. Like it's safe right in this spot to take care of your needs. Again, some of the things we're going to talk about today are going to blow your mind, and I hope it does. And according to the rules of what we're doing here today as a workshop, a wellness workshop, this is not considered to be mental treatment or medical treatment. It is not medical treatment. So please connect with your provider. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you want to explore further about making a plan for yourself. I put questions at the end of the week. What I meant to put was recording at the end of the week. Something that I am trying really hard to commit to is correcting the captions, because often the captions do not accurately reflect what I am saying, both because I'm autistic and I have some issues with praxis, moving my mouth to make my mouth words work. And I'm also autistic. And so there are some barriers to communication. And for whatever reason, closed caption does not like me. So that's okay. Me and closed caption are going to work it out a little bit. And I really feel like it's important to make sure that my recordings for the future have correct captions. So that is why the recording will come at the end of the week. Questions at the end. Yes. Please save your questions to the end. Again, it's just me by myself today. And so I'm going to be moving through the slides. We will take a short break about halfway through. And then by the time we get to the end, I'm hopeful that we have enough time to get to some questions. So those are the agreements. Also important for me and everybody in the community to extend gratitude to the community. I have learned so much from being a part of the neurodivergent community, specifically the autistic community. The sensory processing work that I'm going to talk to you today, I learned about in OT school, and I have refined and reinforced my understanding of sensory processing because of the tremendously valuable feedback from the neurodivergent community. So those of you who are here from the neurodivergent community, I want to specifically thank you for being vulnerable and for being honest, because I am listening. And we will turn this ship around. We are going to make some changes. And so I want to thank everybody here who is a change maker today. All right, we're going to get into sensory. Sensory, sensory, sensory. It seems so complicated, and it is. However, there's really just a few simple steps to sensory processing. When we are talking about sensory processing, first, it's important to note that this entire model was designed by Winnie Dunn in 1997. Pretty rad. I was graduating high school. Winnie Dunn was writing neuromodels, and congrats to both of us. The reason why I focus on Winnie Dunn and the sensory processing model is that Winnie Dunn is clear in the literature and in the ways that sensory processing is applied in the field, that there is no wrong way to have a brain. A neurodivergent brain is a neurodivergent brain. Any work that we do, any ways that we support each other, whether it's in a professional setting or if we're just supporting ourselves or our loved ones or our families, comes from the place that we only want to either nourish and nurture the positive sensory experiences somebody has and protect and heal some of the negative sensory experiences that we have. We are not, however, trying to change the brain. The brain is the brain is the brain is the brain. And as an autistic person, I genuinely do not want my brain to be changed. I really like it. I love the way that I experience sensory. I don't love the way that society creates sensory experiences for me. So it is important because you will see a lot of different sensory language out there. The model that I defer to is Winnie Dunn, 1997, because specifically it is explicitly neurodiversity affirming, neurodivergent affirming. Okay. That is not to say that you cannot get good sensory stuff from sensory integration or any of the other, especially the psych sensory somatization models. That's just the one that I'm picking, and I will hoot and holler for it for the rest of my life. When Winnie Dunn pulled in this information for sensory information, she clarified it to say, all right, y'all, this is what is happening in a sensory process, a sensory cycle. First, sensory information is received from the receptors. So for example, if I open a bottle of peppermint essential oil, which is my favorite regulator, top 10 choice. If once I open that bottle, from the essential oils, there are little molecules, air, the scent is wafting beautifully from this essential oil. And that scent goes up to my nose, and my olfactory receptors, or these little sensory grabby hands in my nose, grab on to that sensory information. The olfactory sensory receptors then translate and transfer that information to my brain. Once the information arrives at the brain, my brain processes that information. So the first thing my brain is going to do is make sure, number one, that it's not a threat, that it's actually wonderful peppermint essential oil scent and not burning smoke, which was a little bit ago. My husband forgot that he decided to make something and turned on the heat under our cast iron pan. And so it was a little smelly. But no, I don't have to pay attention to that smell. My brain knows that it's safe. And then therefore, the rest of that sensory information travels and is processed in my brain against things like just looking for the pure quality of it. What is the smell? How intense is it? What's the tone? What's the actual quality of it? The processing also checks against previous experiences with that specific sensory information. And so we're on step number 3, big step. After everything is processed in the brain, a response is generated and communicated by the brain, and then the body responds. Big, beautiful scent comes in, goes out. The out is the body's response to the brain. Now, it is important to note that this whole process is incredibly complex. There can be difficulties or barriers with the way that we take in information. We could have difficulty or barriers with the way that we process that information, maybe because the specific areas that process are damaged, or we have negative associations with sensory stimuli. It can be a praxis issue, like the way that we move our body, the way that after our brain communicates something to us. There are a lot of things that are happening. And I just kind of want to, in this moment, hold that process and give validation to anybody who feels like they have struggled with the process of processing all this information. It is genuinely a lot. And if you're neurodivergent, autistic, ADHD, borderline, epileptic, there's so many different diagnoses that are included under the neurodivergent umbrella. Neurodivergent is a term that was coined by Cassian Asamatsu, who has a blog, Radical Neurodivergent Speaking. And neurodivergent simply means anything that diverges from the norm. But again, your brain is not wrong. It is neurodivergent. The way that society and the way that environment and the way that constructs and the way that expectations provide you with sensory experiences simply can be dysregulating. How do we differ? So there is the typical sensory experience. There's the typical way that people experience sensory. We, neurodivergents, are 2 standard deviations outside the norm. That means that the way that we experience sensory is statistically significantly different than the way that people who have typical sensory experiences have that same experience. We are 2 standard deviations different. We experience things way more intensely or require much more intense input to even be aware of sensory information. That is not disordered. That is our brain. Again, the reason why I'm like reinforcing this is a lot of people will talk to me about sensory processing disorder. And what I want to be careful about is, yes, it's absolutely true that your sensory processing systems can be disordered in they are. However, I do not believe that neurodivergent brains are disordered. I believe that neurodivergent brains experience sensory exactly the way that they are supposed to do. And it is the responsibility of the people around and the person themselves and constructs and systems to be accommodating to those sensory needs. The reality right now today is at a widespread level that's not seen. But again, we are the change makers here by just validating that we experience sensory differently and we have a right to access places, people, and experiences. Another thing that you will see when we are talking about sensory processing are these words right here, hyper and hyposensory. You are sensitive. You are not going to hear me use those words today. Why? Because specifically hyper and hypo suggest that they're too much. They're too much outside the norm. I reject that language. I do not believe that there's anything disordered about a neurodivergent brain. So the way that you experience sensory is not too much or too little. The words that you will hear today, and we're going to talk about these, and these ideas are going to be reinforced. If you're hypersensitive, means that you respond really quickly. Well, that's a behavior that's associated with somebody who likely has a low threshold. Hypersensitivity most likely is somebody who has a low threshold. Again, we will explain the terms. Hyposensitivity is somebody who needs a lot repeated or really intense stimulation in order to become aware of it. It's not too much or too little. Hyposensitive correlates with the experience of having a high threshold. We will talk about why that is. The problem that is often faced by neurodivergent people, especially as they grow, especially as they reach adulthood, is because during their childhood, either they weren't afforded opportunities to protect and nourish their sensory experiences. Therefore, they now experience chronic habituation and chronic dysregulation. Chronic habituation happens when at some point your body's sensory gating systems just kind of shut off. They're not taking in new information. However, and that means you're habituated. You now no longer notice. I live in farm country and it's spring, so it smells like cow poop everywhere. But I live in cow country, or I live in farm country. And so at some point, unless the smell becomes extremely intense, I don't notice it. What's important to say, especially about habituation, is it still has a physiological impact on your body. So again, let's take this from a different angle. The people who are doing construction in different areas on the street and they're jackhammering concrete, often they have protection for their ears. Most times they habituate to all the noisy construction sounds around them, but there's still a vibratory impact on the ear canal, the systems in the ear, the systems, et cetera, et cetera. So just because you get used to something doesn't mean that it doesn't have an impact on your body. And what often happens with neurodivergent people is that they become so habituated that they don't understand why their body is suffering so many years later. Be it anxiety, depression, be it autoimmune disease, be it gastrointestinal issues. Those are all linked to chronic habituation and chronic dysregulation. So oftentimes the sensory experience of the environments that we're in is completely dysregulating. We have habituated to it, but again, our systems still experience that dysregulation. And what that teaches neurodivergent people is to disassociate from their bodily experience. This is very, very dangerous for a neurodivergent body. We have to talk about this because as much effort as we put into understanding the experience, especially of children, yes, we want to support them. But here's the thing, we're not supporting them well, and our children are growing into dysregulated adults who really need a lot of medical, mental, and spiritual help because they've been so broken. Not fun. And again, we don't deserve it. It doesn't have to be like that. I want to flip it around. Why? Because neurodivergent people are so amazing. When their sensory experiences are validated and you allow them to be the connoisseurs of their environment, they create the most beautiful things. Neurodivergent people are incredibly sensitive. We pick up on sensory experiences before anybody else does. Remember, 2 standard deviations. What? That's far. So yes, it's so far outside the experience that we really do hear electronics. They're so loud. My fridge is so loud. We really do have those experiences. It has been actually hysterical for me as a deaf person recently getting my bilateral implants. The whole world is so loud. How do y'all cope? I take my implants out, it's so loud. Ugh. But that sensitivity is a brilliant thing because we notice things first and we're able to call it out. And I often say that neurodivergent people are like the little kids in the crowd when the emperor is showing off his new clothes. And we're the kids like, that guy's naked, right? Sensitive at a sensory level. We're the people like, Wow, this is really horrible. All this noise and sound is horrible for our bodies. They're starting to listen to us. We're very intuitive, we're very analytical, we are the experts. I have never known people who treat their sensory systems and the things that they really enjoy so exquisitely as I do neurodivergent people. They're really, really beautiful. And they are the experts when they are allowed to have more autonomy and control over their nervous system. All right. So what do we do? What do we do about this? I'm going to take a drink. Sensory processing. Today, I'm going to talk about sensory processing, and I'm going to mention 4 terms: passive strategy, active strategy, low threshold, high threshold. That's it. That's all I want you to know. That's all I want you to hear today. You will build on this in the future. You will start to see what I mean when I talk about passive strategies and active strategies, low thresholds and high thresholds. But really, those are the terms that I want you to have. Active strategies and passive strategies. Every single person has a preference. Each individual sensory system also has a preference. So there are 2 basic types of strategies, passive and active. A passive strategy is something that involves controlling the environment and setting ourselves up for success. For example, an example of a passive strategy would be to support the understanding of stimming. So if you think about a child who is stimming or an adult who is stimming, who is flapping their hands, who is pacing back and forth, it is a passive strategy to support that person in meeting their needs if the context or the way that we socially understand what they're doing is supportive of them. Therefore, that person does not need to process, oh my God, is somebody looking at me? Do they think I'm weird? Do they think I'm dangerous to them? Right? That is a passive strategy which supports success in whatever somebody wants to engage in. Another example of a passive strategy could be like having a printout of a PowerPoint available before a class. Because once you know that that PowerPoint is going to be there and it's going to be there every time, you're going to have this resource for yourself, and it frees up the neurological processing that you would otherwise need to ensure that you have that for yourself. So you don't have to worry about executive function kind of things. Passive strategy really is about support, whether it be inside yourself, outside your body, the environment, the people that you're with, and really, again, setting yourself up for success. An active strategy is in the moment. It's the things that we do to create solutions, to move, to engage ourselves. For example, I talked about stimming as a passive strategy, like setting up the environment or protecting the environment to say, hey, we support stimming here. An example of an active strategy would be actually stimming. So maybe flapping your hands, or maybe especially coming up with new and exciting ways to interact with things. So if I were to, what do I have here? Flip my phone over and over again, that could be an example of an active strategy. A passive strategy, again, is something that sets you up for success, that is really built into the structure of your environment. It can be physical and it can be social. Like for example, people who prefer passive strategies often do better in jobs that have a union. Why? Because their brain feels better and doesn't have to process as much if they have that solid structure. People who prefer active strategies are people who are going to flourish in places that promote rapid change, creativity, constant movement. Again, Neither one of these things is preferred, or is right or wrong. Neither one of these things is better. Our brains simply have a preference, and we need both. So just because I personally have a strong preference for passive strategies does not mean that I also don't need to engage in active strategies. It's just that passive strategies help me to feel a little bit more centered and focused. Where somebody who needs to move, needs to go around, is going to do better in a space or in experiences or in tasks that encourage that. So that's active and passive strategies. Then we're going to talk about low thresholds and high thresholds. Low thresholds are very simply this. It only takes a little bit of information to wake these systems up. They can be easily overwhelmed. And in these particular systems, sometimes people can appear rigid because they only have such a little low threshold. They can only really experience so much before, number one, first part is they become aware of it. Number two, the second part is they become dysregulated by it. Teeny tiny teacup. Only a little bit of info. I was talking about my nose before. In my olfactory, my smelling system, I have a low threshold. It only takes me a little bit, or I only need a little bit of smell information to become aware of it. This is the most frustrating thing I can tell you for my daughter forever, because I don't like the smell of synthetics. And so she was always putting stuff to make her smell beautiful. And she did smell beautiful. However, my brain couldn't handle the overwhelm of synthetic smells. And so we had compromised, and she would always, when she was at school or she was out, but she would come home and it would be like hours and hours, 9-10 hours after, when she would be coming home from school for the day. And she would put it on in the morning. And I, like, immediately, as soon as she opened the door, I could smell it. Low threshold. That's not her problem. That's not even my problem. It just is. It's just the thing that is. I have a low threshold. I have a low threshold. Cool. The other type of threshold, like, it's a continuum, it's a spectrum, it's not a binary, it's actually like a whole range. Low threshold, tiny teacup, the other side of that range is high threshold. These are systems that are great big old buckets. You need a lot of information before you are even aware of it. You need a lot of information before you are sick of it. And you need a lot of new input, because you need so much information that you're actually getting used to it. You're habituating to it. And so you need a lot of new information to be able to sustain your engagement and secure your success. People who have these great big old buckets can appear distracted. They're not really. What their brain is doing is saying, seek out more information, wiggle your foot, click your pen, wiggle in your chair. Those are examples of moving more. You need to move more. You have a high threshold for movement. That's not wrong. And your brain is pretty brilliant, clicking and wiggling your ankle and doing whatever you need to do in order to remain engaged. People with low thresholds only need a little bit, but that is so supportive and helping them feel safe so they can engage. People with high thresholds need a lot of it, a lot of sensory information, and providing them with that sensory information really helps them to be focused and engaged. Woo. But what's important to remember about thresholds? Tiny teacups, big bucket. Low threshold, tiny teacup. High threshold, big bucket. Thresholds can and do change. Oh man, they really do. And it can change depending on what's happening in your life. It can change depending on what the weather is, it can change dependent on how you feel. If you're feeling tired, if you're feeling sick, if you're feeling dysregulated, your threshold or the amount of sensory stimulation that you can really manage changes. For example, I already have a low olfactory threshold, but when I'm sick, that threshold actually gets even lower, even teeny tinier. Because I don't feel well, my systems have changed. The threshold has changed. And so, therefore, I might have to protect those systems even a little bit more than I would on a typical day. It's just important for you to know your baseline. Like, where are you at your set point? If everything has been provided for you and you're in a regulated space and you're really getting everything you need, what does that look like? Understanding what your baseline is for your thresholds helps you then later on, if you need to problem solve about something that's either going super wrong or something that's going super right, that's really helping you. What are your signs of dysregulation? Again, no judgment, no judgment zone, no, nothing, none of that allowed here. Dysregulation is a brilliant form of communication by your brain. It's saying this is too much or too little, and I really need help. Behavior often is communication. Sometimes it's not, but it mostly is. Knowing that dysregulation is just communication and just an opportunity to be like, oh, this is going, either I really like this and I want to keep doing it, or maybe I need to change because something's uncomfortable. What can I do? Knowing that about yourself and knowing that about other people and doing so in a completely non-judgmental way is important. Also, acknowledging that there are certain sensory systems that you really can open and close. So how can you shut off sensory information? So for example, wearing noise cancelers, incredibly powerful, wear them. I don't know why people think noise ear defenders are weird. I think they're so cool. I think everybody who wears them looks amazing. So if anybody has a problem with you wearing ear defenders everywhere, send them to me and I'll tell them how amazing you look. There's ways to open up sensory systems and make them even more available to receive input. For example, I don't know if you know, like exercise, increasing your heart rate actually increases the saturation in the way that you experience the intensity that you experience sensory information. So know that your systems can be to some degree open and closed if you need to be able to guard that information. How do you know? Oh my goodness. This is something that I offer, a sensory profile. I do it based off the standardized assessment that was written by Winnie Dunn. So that's the assessment that I use. But the reality is everybody has a sensory profile. And each person's sensory profile is unique. Each system in the sensory profile has its own threshold. Each system in the sensory profile has its own preference for strategies, and each system in the sensory profiles has a different way that you would plan to set that person up for regulation and success. So, the systems that we are going to be talking about include, and these are the ones specifically that are included in Winnie Dunn's sensory profile, include touch, hearing, sight, smell, taste are often put together because it's difficult to separate them. And we also have olfactory receptors, so smell receptors on our tongue. So it's really like once something is interacting with the gustatory system or tasting, smell is often always involved, or often involved, excuse me. Activity is the closest thing that sensory processing comes to right now for interoception. But the good news is that Winnie Dunn is actually expanding her model to include interoception, which is the ways that we feel inside of our body. So heart rate, respiratory rate, if you're hungry, if you have to go to the bathroom, emotions can also be part of the interoception system. But again, in sensory processing right now, this is the closest that we get. And then movement. And movement is a combination of scores that involve vestibular input and proprioception. Vestibular input is movement, how we are moving in relation to the horizon. It lets you know if you're going back and forth, side to side, up, down, if you're inverting, if you're spinning round and round. All of that information is part of the vestibular system. The other thing that is included in the movement system is proprioception. And so where vestibular is focused on how you are moving your body, proprioception focuses on where is your body. Proprioception is the feeling that you get in the joints of your body, in the muscles of your body. So for example, if I'm pushing down on my desk, I'm getting pressure in my wrists. I'm getting pressure in my elbow. I'm getting a lot of pressure in my shoulder. And that is letting me know where my body is. Important to note, the vestibular and proprioceptive systems are two of the most powerful systems to regulate. When you need long-term regulation, getting vestibular input is the best. So for example, being in a swing, rocking back and forth, pacing, doing a walking meditation, walking in a line, walking outside, and going in straight, like on a sidewalk. That would be a really great way to get linear vestibular, which is a long-term, gives you long-term regulation benefits. Proprioception, so pushing, holding your hands, squeezing them together, having a weighted blanket, having a weighted lap pad, wearing something that like a heavy sweater, like I often do, gives a lot of pressure to your body, and that helps you in the immediate moment. So vestibular is really good for long-term regulation. Proprioception is great for short-term regulation. Both of these are included in the movement system. And we are right at the point where we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about how we just talked about high thresholds, passive or thresholds, strategies. We're going to talk about how they all come together and what that looks like, and some little tips and tricks that you can do to help you if you experience these things. Right now it's 2:50 my time, and so we are going to come back in 5 minutes at 2:55. Thank you. 5 minutes. Hello, hello. All right.
Hey.
Hi, yay. So we are back at 2:55 and Kate is here. Hi, Kate.
Hi. How you
Happy.
doing?
I'm wonderful. I'm so happy you're here. Ah,
Okay, I'm sorting out my Zoom.
okay. No problem. Well, while you sort out your Zoom, I'm going to go back to the screen share. Screen share. And boom. All right, Kate. So we've talked about the sensory systems. We've talked about thresholds, high thresholds, low thresholds. We've talked about passive strategies and active strategies. And what do we get? When we bring them all together, we get quadrants because we love to separate and categorize things. So here we have on one line, again, the spectrum between the range between passive strategies. And then if you come all the way over here on the other side, here's the range for active strategies. So passive to active on this line, which is what, the Y line? I don't know what you call that. I haven't taken math in so long, Kate. But this line is threshold. So from going from a high threshold all the way down to a low threshold. And one thing, Kate, that I want to reinforce when we talk about this is that preference for strategies does not indicate high or low intensity. So sometimes people feel like those who enjoy more passive strategies have less intensity, and that's not true. It's just a different type of strategy. So for people who have higher thresholds and a preference for active strategy, we often talk about them as being sensory seeking because they have a very high threshold, that big old bucket, and they need to meet it, and they're always looking to do so. And they prefer active strategies. So oftentimes we see them as seeking because we see them creating, we see them moving, we see them doing, which is where that term came about. But what sensory seeking simply means is it's somebody who has a high threshold in that system and a preference for active strategies. Now, on the other side of this continuum, again, not less, not more, it's a different preference for passive strategies. Low registration, which is one of the most misunderstood terms in all of sensory processing, because people are like the words low registration or can often be seen as bystander. And these people are people who have very high thresholds and have a preference for passive strategies. So sometimes people think that they're those who have scored with high thresholds and passive strategies, low registration, they think people like they're lazy, they stand back, they don't know what to do, they don't know how to do it. The reality is that these are people who need a lot of passive strategies and a lot of structure to support their engagement. High threshold, passive strategy is low registration, people with high thresholds and a preference for active strategies, sensory seeking. On the other side of the continuum, the threshold continuum, we have low thresholds. People who have low thresholds, again, tiny little teacup, only takes a little bit to turn it on. And those who have a preference for active strategies. So when they have their needs met, they're going to actively protect those needs and only give themselves the things that they need to get in order to stay engaged with their low threshold. Sensory avoiders. What does this look like? Again, Avoiding behaviors suggests what we often see. What we see is are people withdrawing, isolating, which are all valid things to do. But what we need to understand about people who we see avoiding is that they're really protecting a low threshold area. They know their threshold, they know what they need, they know what their dysregulation looks like, and they are being protective of not being dysregulated. And one of the ways that they are going to do it is through active behavior. So physically removing themselves, putting their hands over their ears, running away from a noisy environment. Active strategies to protect their low threshold tiny teacup. On the other end of the continuum for strategies are people who have low thresholds and a preference for passive strategies. Again, low threshold tiny teacup, only need a little bit of this in the system to wake it up. Preference for passive strategies, things that are built into the environment to already protect a sensitive system. So, for example, if I have an extremely low threshold in visual, I might choose to put room darkening shades to protect my low visual system that is already set up in the environment to protect. All right, going into this a little bit more and with tips and things that you can do. If your sensory systems come together and you have a need for high thresholds and passive strategies, you are going to get a score that's maybe high, maybe low. We'll talk about that at a different time. In low registration. Typically, people with low registration patterns may miss important information and get off task when doing projects, and may be slower to process information given to them, especially in busy sensory environments. On one hand, such individuals find it easier to focus on tasks and interests in distracting environment. On the other hand, they seem distracted. It's not that they're distracted, they simply don't have enough to sustain their engagement. So for people who have a preference for passive strategies and have a really high threshold need, how can we get that need met? What do they look like? Well, let me tell you first what they look like. This is the person who opens the fridge and is like, where's the ketchup? And will spend 5 minutes looking for the ketchup, and it's literally right in front of their face. This is the person who says, where's my glasses? And spends 30 minutes looking for their glasses, and their glasses are on top of their head. This is the person who plans the heck out of a party with a theme. You give a low reg person a theme and they are going to bring the entire party, right? High threshold really like to saturate themselves with environmental and constructual and contextual supports for engagement. Ways to support either a system or a person holistically who just prefers these patterns. Enhance enhance the task features and contextual clues. You can do this by literally putting little sticky notes, like first do this, then second do this, third, fourth, like an outline, a note, a checklist. Low reg people love a checklist. I'm not saying we finish it, but we love it. I love when the checklist is given to me by somebody else, because I know these are the things that I need to accomplish and these are the things that I need to complete. Increasing contrast, make the things that are important stick out. So for example, highlight, highlight, highlight. If you are preparing documents and you have a lot of words, it might be beneficial to highlight certain words so that somebody who has a high threshold and prefers to have strategies, passive strategies, will then have extra information to make important things stick out. Also important to decrease predictability, because again, these people have a very high threshold need, very high threshold need. And so a way to decrease predictability, remember we talked about before, a way to make sensory stand out a little more is to increase your heart rate if that's safe for you to do. Well, decreasing predictability oftentimes increases your heart rate, which makes the sensory around you stand out more at a neurological level. So that is low registration, high threshold passive strategy. Sensory seekers, again, high threshold active strategies, not passive strategies, and active strategies are only different in the way that we are providing supports, but they're equal in intensity. People really experience these needs. Again, the neurodivergent population that I'm talking about, people like me, 2 standard deviations. We are statistically significantly different. If you experience sensory seeking in a particular system or as a pattern that you like to kind of use through your life, people who score with sensory seeking patterns like to create new stimuli or look for environments with new stimuli already in them. They have an interest in exploring the environment and usually find sensory experiences pleasurable. These individuals may also become easily bored and may find low stimulus environments intolerable to the point of needing escape. What I want to say about this, Kate, is that is neurological necessity. When people feel so understimulated, their brain literally registers that as potential danger. In our society, not paying attention, not being focused, not being engaged is seen as being non-compliant, et cetera, so on and so forth. And so not having your neurological needs met feels dangerous. And these people often are responding appropriately by going to seek the sensory experiences they need in order to feel successful, held, engaged. People with sensory seeking patterns, whether that be overall how they want to engage in life or within a sensory system, do best when they are provided with more opportunities, increased opportunities for exploration, increased opportunities for interaction, and a decrease, again, in predictability. Changing the heart rate to make sensory stimuli be more salient. That's what we call it in the field. Sensory seekers and low reg, again, connected by high threshold needs, difference for a strategy preference. What does a sensory seeker look like? Well, we probably know the most about sensory seekers right now. People who crash, boom, bang, who enjoy creating, who are intensely creative, like are a walking party, a walking sound machine, a walking light machine, a walking noise machine, a walking movement. Like these people really like to engage in and create life experience sensory all around them. Somebody with sensory sensitivity. Now we're moving into people who have lower thresholds. Again, lower threshold means a tiny teacup, only a little bit needed to turn on that system and be aware. People with a preference for passive strategies mean that in order to protect and nurture these low threshold systems that respond really quickly, people with sensory sensitivities like to set up the environment to be protective of those systems. So people with sensory sensitivity patterns respond readily to sensory stimuli. They may seem distracted or uncomfortable around certain types of stimuli. They may also notice changes in the environment more quickly than others. Advantages of this pattern include a high level of awareness of the environment, the ability to discriminate sensory stimuli, and an intense attention to detail. In order to support somebody who has these patterns, it's important to get rid of noxious stimuli. If they don't like it, they don't like it. And it's an actual like neurological experience in their brain. To continue to force somebody to experience something that they don't like leads to the chronic habituation and the chronic dysregulation that we were talking about before. But people, it's important. I'm somebody who often experience these patterns. People who have a preference for passive strategies really are looking to the environment to help them to regulate. So for example, let's see, oh my God, there's so many examples. One of my favorite coping strategies is having a hot drink of tea. And a way that I passively meet my needs is that I make sure, either by doing it myself or having somebody else do it for me, that I have all the things that I need to make tea, like tea bags, water, a tea kettle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is so important for these people when they have a need to be able to look to and engage in the environment to have their need met at a neurological level. Yeah, moving forward, on the other side of this continuum are people who have low thresholds, so only tiny teacups in either their their patterns of preference or an individual system, and prefer active strategies. So creating, protecting, blocking. Typically, people with a sensory avoiding pattern actively work to reduce and control their stimuli. People with avoiding patterns can be overwhelmed or bothered by sensory stimuli. Sensation avoiders actively engage with their environment to, oh my goodness, I lost my words. To reduce sensory stimuli. They may prefer rituals and routines to protect their boundaries. Advantages of this profile include the ability to structure and self-regulate. People who are sensory avoiders get a bad rap because the word avoiding has a negative connotation, obvious, sometimes. I don't like that. These are sensory warriors. They're sensory connoisseurs. They really know what they like, and they are uncompromising in receiving anything that they don't like, and good for them. Great for them. I'm really proud to hear that there's people who have low thresholds and are able to use active strategies to protect those thresholds. And we really need to just support them with we need to create a context of acceptance around these people, because people with sensory avoiding patterns genuinely only tiny teacup, little bit of input to dysregulate them, and they should be empowered to protect their own dysregulation. That's why they're excellent self-regulators and they're really firm with their boundaries. Good for you. Keep going. What do you do with this information? That's so much. How do you find out? Well, personally, you can know your sensory profile. Coming this week, again, reminder, the recording is going to come a little bit later. What also will be included is a link to my Ko-fi page, Ko-fi, I don't know how to say it. But that's currently where I'm taking commissions on the sensory profile. So if that's something that's interesting to you, there will be a code for 10% off of a sensory profile, which would make the total cost $180. It's typically $200. It also comes with a 30-minute consultation. I'm really super good at this. And so if it's something that you want to know in a standardized format, I can do that for you. I also will be providing you with links to self-assessments that you could take to start to get a really good understanding of what your sensory profile is. Advocate for your sensory needs. The things that you like, neurological. You don't like them at a neurological level, and that deserves to be respected. The things that you do like, love on it, engage in it. Bring more of that into your life. When you understand that your personal sensory needs are neurological necessity, it helps you, number one, to be specific in how you want to advocate for yourself. And two, it helps you to understand the sensory profiles of other people. And so it's really a beautiful way to come together to negotiate what I call negotiate transactional boundaries, which is my personal definition for self advocacy. You have to know your needs in order to advocate for them. And then with that, you can create a sensory plan of action. What are your low threshold systems? What are your high threshold systems? How can you set up the environment to be successful for you? What types of understanding do you need? Attitudinal accommodations, things that people can provide to you so that your brain doesn't have to resource all of that. Passive strategies. And what things do you need? Active strategies. How can you engage? How can you create? How can you engage in new ways? That is going to be specific to you and your sensory profile, and knowing your sensory profile will help you create that plan of action. Professionally, if you are, I know that a lot of people are here. I saw that there was an autistic OT student here. Whoop, whoop. Welcome. Yes. So those of you who are here for professional reasons, please protect vulnerability. Validate the sensory experience of yourself and the people around you, especially if you are working with a neurodivergent population. We have been gaslit and lied to and made feel bad about ourselves for the fact that we experience sensory statistically different than everybody else. So yeah, it's really important to validate those experiences and seek community voices, people who really understand what this experience is like. Because if you experience sensory in a typical way, you just don't know. If you experience sensory in a divergent way, you don't know that other people are also experiencing sensory divergently, oftentimes. So having community to kind of come together and better understand this is really super duper important. And Kate, I am so proud of myself.
Wow, you're doing incredibly
I-
the time.
I got the time perfect.
Anyway,
I have 13 minutes left for questions. So first, Kate, do you have any, like, you were here this whole time, do you have any like feedback, questions, comments, thoughts before we open?
No, but partly because I know this presentation quite well now, and I've asked you all my questions. But there's some great questions here. So
okay, perfect.
Can social stimuli or inputs be considered part of sensory? Now I know I'd answer that, but what's yours? What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. So social stimuli and input are definitely a part of the sensory experience. Primarily, we find social stimuli to be considered a passive strategy often. Like if social and